flow pen. Look on, no hands. Look on, no frame, no shame. Numb me up like cocaine. Can't focus, shake again. Which moment makes a man? Cause I'm hoping it just begins.
Welcome. I'm Dr. Robert Groves, your host for the Groves Connection podcast. The Groves Connection brings you intimate conversations with pundits, providers, patients, leaders, and laypeople, all to help us understand a contradiction. How can our healthcare system be both magnificent and yet so deeply flawed? We're going inside healthcare to talk candidly with those who know. What they have to say may delight, surprise, frustrate, or at times even anger you. But I invite you to get curious and listen to the truth about healthcare and those who want to fix it. Maybe the answers have been there all along. We just need to make the connection. Are you ready to connect? Dr. Sunil Budhrani, welcome to the Groves Connection.
Thank you so much. I was looking forward to catching up with you today. How are you?
I am doing great, Sunil. And the first thing I have to do is say that you're a very patient man, and to give the audience an idea of what that means. In the interest of full transparency, Sunil and I just did an hour and a half, a great show, and I forgot to push record. So let's get right back into it. And to start out, as you know, Sunil, now, I want to start with where you grew up and what that was like, elementary school. What were you thinking then? What was your home life like? Give us a flavor of what that felt like for you.
Yes. And again, thanks for the opportunity here to share this with you. So I grew up the first son of an immigrant family who settled in the D.C., Maryland area in the 60s. Interestingly enough, I was the first kid in our family to complete high school and go into college and then on to medical school. So I have my deepest roots and greatest foundation from how I was brought up. And that was in a retail mall business. I grew up in a jewelry store, in a jewelry family business. And I think some of the most important lessons I learned in my career came from those early experiences when I was a young boy. I understood and appreciated the value of taking calculated risk. I understood and appreciated the importance of the customer and the people that we're serving, how to build relationships with people, communication skills, and so on. And so, those early years provided a foundation I never thought would come in so handy later in my career as I went down these medical pursuits.
Tell me, did you have any inkling at that time that you wanted to be in healthcare? Was that on your mind?
Like many folks at the time, I call it the pre-internet era.
Yeah.
Especially if you came from a family that was immigrating to this country, there was a lot of emphasis and interest in the sciences or the engineering fields and so on. So for me, I would say early on, being the kind of first child educated in the country, that science was something that was encouraged in my family. And
Right.
Fortunately, it didn't feel like something that was forced upon, in the sense that I naturally ended up enjoying the subject matter and also the idea of someday becoming a doctor. So I'm one of those folks, for good or bad, ever since I can remember or have a recollection of anything, that I was telling myself someday it would be great to be able to take care of people and patients by virtue of being a physician.
What's fascinating in my mind about your career in particular is, yes, science-based, but relationships are incredibly important to much of your career. Or tell me if I'm wrong in that, but it feels to me like you have a pretty balanced approach of science and then the softer skills, relationship management, communication, how to establish change in individuals and organizations. Did all that come naturally to you, or was that something that was intentionally developed? How did you develop? Because so many folks who go into healthcare think that it's science only, or that you have to take a full science curriculum. when you were in college, how did you make the decision about what you were going to study and how?
Even in some ways, it predates that. When I was growing up, English was not commonly spoken at home. And what I mean by that is, yes, my parents assimilated to the country and obviously, accumulated the knowledge of English. But at home, it was very often that they would speak the Indian native tongue to myself, and then I would respond back in English. And you can only get so good at English and communication in that environment. So, I think I was encouraged and inspired in high school, or even before college, by some of my English teachers who challenged me to be a better writer, a better thinker, an organized thinker. That led on, to your point, in college, as painful as it was to force myself to do a minor in English. And it was I joke, it was probably the smartest, painful, and someday realized fun experience of really getting encompassed in the language of English and the power of words. And later on, while you become a physician, the connection between the patient and the doctor and that social, emotional, relationship connection is as powerful as a healer sometimes as the science and prescriptions and medicines and things we do to patients.
I can't agree more with you there. I think that's an aspect of medicine that we've lost to some extent, or at least devalued to some extent. 10-minute appointments, not enough time to really establish relationship and trust, and that's where influence comes from. So I hear you loud and clear, and many of the things that you've done have been to try to rebalance that scale, it seems to me, in some way.
Yeah, and you put it very well. It is a rebalancing and a constant learning and evolution of how you can connect with people, because I do think, we can do so many things in every industry, not just healthcare, more effectively if we just take the time to build that relationship and build that trust and that buy-in. I call it the buy-in, whether it's a patient or whether it's my colleagues at work, to be able to accomplish, what is the goal? And that's to improve our well-being.
So let's take a step back now. And you're in high school. How did you make a decision about where you wanted to go to college, and how did you make those decisions?
I always say I'm very grateful for the education I've received, over the years, and it's always an idea of mine to give back in those settings. And so, and I was very much a proponent of squeezing the juice out of the lemon. So in high school, I really took advantage of all the opportunities that were available to me. I ran for student government and had the opportunity to be president of the high school, and I played varsity sports. I always joke there were not many Indian kids at that time that could play varsity lacrosse and then ultimately get recruited in some D3 schools to play sports and stuff. But all just aside, some of the most valuable lessons I got through high school, and to help me through my career, being able to appreciate things that you can't plan for, being able to work as a team on a common goal. Some people are better than me in certain positions. I'm better in other positions. How do we come together and want to win?
Yeah.
So those ideas and those feelings, while I still were very exposed and inspired by my biology teachers in high school, led me, I think, in a better position to be successful as I went on to choosing my college and where I went on to go to medical school.
You touch on something that comes up often in these conversations that I've been having, and that is mentors. It's fascinating how important key people can be in the lives of all of us. And do you have recollections of specific mentors in high school that, you said your biology teacher was, the way I think about a good teacher is it's somebody that I don't want to disappoint, and so I will go that extra mile to make sure I don't disappoint, because I have so much respect for them. And I can think of many folks along the way that were like that to me. How about in your career? Is that a common theme as well?
Yeah. So, I would be remiss if I didn't say, my original mentors were the ones that were out of school. Those are my parents.
Yes, of course.
We often don't necessarily realize that until we get older.
Yeah.
The environment that they created of taking risk and working in a retail setting, appreciation of business, very early age. While then I would complain and be like, well, I want to spend where the summers where my friends are at the beach.
Yeah.
I was in a store helping out on Christmas and things like that. So, I have to acknowledge that. In high school, like I said, interestingly enough, was, mentors were folks in the English classes, the professors and
yeah.
teachers in English, because they pushed me to be better at being able to express myself clearly, succinctly. They put the bar high, and they were tough at expecting from us that. And that inspired me that once I felt like that was acknowledged in high school, to continue down that funny, painful path of doing that minor in English while pursuing the sciences at the same time.
I should mention at this point that it's you have an MD, but you also have some other degrees behind your name. It sounds to me like you've been a high achiever and highly driven for your entire life. You've got an MPH and an MBA in addition to your MD degree. So broad training across a variety of perspectives. How did that occur? What made you want to do all of those things?
I don't even look at it as a high achiever as much as it is a curious learner. I've always been interested in knowing what else is going on besides the direction I'm going in. So in other words, when I was going to college, I had the opportunity to go to University of Pennsylvania, and I was happy to not be so far from the DC area and home.
Yes.
In some ways, some would call me a mama's boy, but I wanted to be far enough but close enough where I can get back where I needed to. And it was interesting, even at Penn, I had the opportunity to not just be a major in the sciences. I chose a major that was broad disciplined in the biological basis of behavior, where you study your biological sciences, but you also have exposure to anthropology, history, health, finance, and economics, things that allow you to have an understanding of the periphery of healthcare while taking the pre-medical sciences. So doing all of this kind of work made me realize I'm interested in the whole ecosystem of what surrounds just the being a medical doctor. So when I applied to medical school after that experience, there were a handful of programs in the United States that had these combined MD public health administration programs.
Gotcha.
And George Washington was one of those programs in the U.S. that had it, and it meant coming back home, which was not such a shabby idea after all, given a number of my friends and colleagues who had gone away to college and then ended up going in finance or policy or law. They ended up coming back, so it was a chance for us to kind of connect and be a part of that young professional experience at the time.
Yeah, that sounds like a great homecoming. And you are to this day, as I understand it, maybe with a little time in between, but you're still on the faculty at George Washington. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It's those things in lives. You do these things, and then you don't realize how the story will continue to evolve and end up. So I've always been grateful and a proponent of the places that have educated me. I always say, there's two sectors, education and healthcare, that really shouldn't have any politics involved with it. Everybody wants the best healthcare and education. And so for me, being a part of GW is almost like giving back. So I get an opportunity there that's amazing for me to practice there clinically. And that's something I've never given up in 25 some years of doing this. But also being able to teach students and residents and other doctors on what else is happening outside of the hospital care that we provide every day to our patients. What else is happening in everything connected, like digital health, the insurance effects, and so on. So it's always interesting to have those conversations and learn from them and keep my clinical skills up after all these years, but also open up a new door for them to understand.
Got it. So talk to us a little bit. I want to get into your career. So you ended up specializing in emergency medicine, and we can talk about that at some point if you'd like, or now. But talk to us about what that early career was like. What were you thinking then? I mean, were you thinking I'm going to be an ED doc from here on out, or how were you managing your life at that point?
Yeah, so as you know, when you go to medical school, and I had the opportunity because I was doing the public health degree at the same time to get, again, that exposure to health law, health finance, which made the medicine real for me to understand what is the practicality of what I'm learning in organic chemistry or anatomy. What does it mean in the big picture of things? So that was tough, but at the same time, it was incredibly liberating to be able to have that exposure. But then when you get in that third or fourth year, you start having to make some really hard decisions about what you want to spend your life doing in healthcare. And I always find it interesting that we have a few rotations, we have maybe a year or so to really decide, do I want to be an orthopedic surgeon? Do I want to be a urologist or a pediatrician, a psychiatrist, or primary care? And what's fascinating about that experience is that's like somebody making a decision in some ways that I want to be an engineer, I want to work for the FAA, or I want to be a technologist. They're vastly different lifestyles and careers. Yes. Knowing that someday I may pursue interests in business and entrepreneurship and healthcare on a bigger level, I also looked at my mentors, my advisors, my attending supervisors in different specialties, especially those that had been practicing 10 years or more, and I looked at them and saw if they were happy doing what they do. Because some fields are much more rigorous than others, and you want to make sure that you can sustain. I would say it's a marathon, not a sprint, in clinical medicine.
Right.
Putting this all together, I'm okay with somebody not remembering Dr. Budhrani is their doctor, or somebody is not always happy when they come see me, and I don't necessarily need that longitudinal, long-term connected care. So emergency medicine, after putting those factors together, seemed like the inevitable route for me. That's why I headed on to Boston to do my residency.
Yeah. And, you raised a point earlier, and I didn't realize that even at the time that you were training to be an emergency physician, you already had your sights, or even before that, when you made the decision, you already had your sights set on something else in healthcare, that you had the vision that you were going to do something besides just practice the delivery of care to patients. Is that right?
Yeah, I think the right word is vision. I like making it clear to young doctors these days, I did not intend on starting companies or working for a health plan, but I did have a vision that I wanted to do something on a broader population health scale when it came to healthcare. So the reason why I presented like that is I believe very strongly that when you do a residency and you do your training, that you need to get really comfortable and good at that specialty before you decide that it's time. So, I spent the first decade, at least in my career, becoming what I call a subject matter expert in acute and emergency care. Because then I can't impact the world if I'm not really good at what I signed up for originally. So for me, it was the first part of my career was running, managing, and working in emergency departments all across the East Coast. Really getting good at the foundation for what I was going to build later on in my career.
Yeah, okay, that makes perfect sense. I get that. And so talk to us about your first experience in venturing outside of that comfort zone of, because there is sort of a comfort once you get trained and you get into a practice. It's like, okay, I know what I do every day. I've got this. And there's sort of a comfort zone you get into. How did you get outside of that? What was it that made you pick your first venture?
Yes. So I guess, what the point of getting really good at your subject matter expertise is then you have an appreciation for the problems that affect that field. So after several years of doing emergency medicine, it became clear to me that there are other alternatives to the ER. There are better alternatives. There's better systems. So the first problem I tried to solve was, how do we create a venue that's lower cost, more convenient? It's a win-win for everybody, where patients can go obtain care, but more comprehensive care. A place where you have pharmacy, radiology, the doctors. You can do procedures all on one site, one place, one-stop shop. That was when I started my first risk-taking venture in urgent care system in the DC metropolitan area. So with little experience, starting a business, because ER doctors are employed for the most part, and we see our patients and we go home.
Yep.
Urgent care was becoming my own jewelry store, to go back to the
Yes, yes.
where the patients are the customers. And so built out while working at night in the ER to support this kind of venture, and having our firstborn in urgent care in the DC area, and created my vision. But I did also know that I didn't know everything. I knew how to practice clinical medicine. I knew the acute care needs that were necessary.
Yeah.
I did know you need about a high traffic area with the signage and all these other ingredients. But I had to surround myself with people that had a knowledge base that could help me be successful. And that's what I did. I hired talented folks that could help me understand the negotiations with payers, how do you bill, and all the nuances that come with being a successful healthcare business. But what I did was I closely watched and learned from them as they were building that part of my business. And that's where I comes back to what we were talking about. For me, this has just been a lifelong experience of learning how the different components of the healthcare system work, and sometimes don't work, to create a delivery model.
Yeah, you touched on so many things that are part of my fundamental belief system. There was a tip I picked up early on that I've really taken to heart, and I wish I could remember the source of this. I really wish that I could, and maybe one day I will know. But it was instead of trying to become a jack of all trades in whatever your pursuits are, understand what you're really good at, know yourself well enough to know what you're really good at, focus on that, become world-class if you can at that, and then surround yourself with people who make your weaknesses irrelevant. And you just described that perfectly in your approach to that urgent care business. Is that something that that you hold dear as well?
Yes, absolutely. I think that building a team with complementary strengths, not ones that you necessarily have, but ones that are complement yours, are where you create a learning, passionate, and enthusiastic environment that makes your job fun and goal-oriented at the same time. And I've carried that theme on in all the various pursuits, whether it was my subsequent companies or joining the corporate world as a CEO of a health plan.
Yeah, the other thing that I'm just fascinated by, Sunil, is you also embody another concept that I've held dear. I took some coaching courses at Banner to become an internal coach, and they had us come up with a 2-word phrase that would describe our approach at the end of the training. And what I came up with is curiously connected. And the point is connection, communication, relationship, and curiosity is what fuels innovation, growth, and transformation. And you have embodied that in the way that you've approached your career. And that's one of the things that makes you so fascinating to me, and why I enjoy hearing you speak. Talk to us a little bit about how that venture went, and what was the next thing that came up? How did you manage your career from there? First of all, you said, as a quick aside, I was working at night to support this. I was starting a new business, had my firstborn. Wow, that is a lot to take on. Oh my goodness. That must have been a very busy time in your life.
I was fortunate enough to choose a specialty where I could have a security blanket to be able to start a venture. I think physicians, we're funny breed because we become physicians because it's a guaranteed profession to be in. But in some ways, it should encourage us to take more risk, because we can always go back to the guarantee of being a physician or a caretaker or a provider. So, I had that mentality going along. And to your point, after building this urgent care system and scaling it through Maryland, Virginia, and DC, I was able to exit the business successfully and then continue on that path of the theme of finding appropriate ways to take care of patients. So around 2014, we started seeing the payers, one of the largest payers in our region, send millions of letters out to their members saying, we're going to cover telemedicine for you to go see your doctor on video, and it's free. But the interesting thing is, the payers were doing something we see often is not necessarily letting know the providers how you do it. How do you bill for it? How do you do the technology? So we saw this as an opportunity and started a telemedicine company that had basically put all the components of an office visit together: a patient portal and a medical record, an electronic medical record for the doctors to document, and an online video technology to connect the pieces to create that online exam room. And then we were off to the races, educating and writing a lot of papers on how should one conduct a telehealth visit. And we saw this as an opportunity well before the pandemic, but it also had it has its stresses. Anytime you build a new idea, a new solution, even if your gut tells you it's the right thing to do, you have to convince patients and providers. I always call those the two sides of the healthcare coin. Without getting buy-in from both sides, it's hard to launch a healthcare technology. So we were writing a script.
Yeah, that's first of all, amazing forays into very early strategies. Yeah, as you said, pre-pandemic for telemedicine. It sounds like you were pretty early on, early 2000s in the urgent care game. You and I met because of our association with Aetna's joint venture strategy. You were in the very first joint venture that Aetna started with Innova, and I don't know what year that was, but how did you get into that deal after being an entrepreneur for an extended period there, a successful entrepreneur? What happened to land you on a health plan side?
So as I mentioned, I was in the entrepreneurial world between the two companies for almost 15 years. And you expectedly get fatigued and tired, and then you start reflecting back and seeing, I had two daughters over that span of period of time. And you start thinking about, okay, how can I create a better work-life balance? Because you can imagine starting two companies from scratch. You are the founder, you're the engineer in many ways. You're writing the new solutions of how people are going to be using this kind of care. And then you're the salesperson. So to have that round-the-clock job and then thinking about what a corporate setting could look like was interesting, especially when I was reached out by some executives who were part of the Aetna and Innova organizations at the time to consider being their chief medical officer. And it was hard not to find that job intriguing because it was one of the largest payer-provider ventures in the United States, and it was in my backyard.
Yeah.
So for me, it was a matter of I still had a responsibility to continue the growth of my company. I had stakeholders, I had investors at that time, and I had customers that believed in myself and the company. And so it was not something I could just abruptly turn off. So we were able to work out a transition over time, about a year or so. And I was able to turn over the reins to my co-founder as the CEO. And I was joined the joint venture, not knowing what a corporate environment could ever look like, and could even handle me, or I could handle it. Pleased to say I joined around 2016 and really had an amazing opportunity at taking the greatest assets of a health system and care management, expertise in patient care, and merging it with what a payer like Aetna could do with analytics and marketing and actuarial work, and put together the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I was attracted by that same scenario. And you mentioned something previously about curiosity. We talked about that a little bit, but it was an opportunity to learn something new as well. And that's one of the things that drove me. And I'm guessing that was part of your decision too.
Yes, that was very much a part of it also. I mean, you're forging a new path, right? You're creating what you always envisioned should be a better integrated healthcare system. And what better organizations for you and me to be able to partner with, lead, and help devise what the new script of healthcare could look like for our regions.
Yeah, and then, Sunil, to take it one step further, you functioned in the CMO role, and then all of a sudden, next thing I know, you're the CEO of the organization. How did that transpire?
Again, it's one of those things where I like this quote to share that always sticks in my mind. When opportunity knocks at the door, there are some people out there looking for four-leaf clovers, and there's other people that just know it's a time to make the opportunity happen. And so for me, at the time, roughly, CVS was making an acquisition of Aetna, and there was a lot of excitement related to that, but there was also a lot of change.
Yeah.
It was a time where I thought I might take that same transition and enter the policy healthcare world and see what levers I could pull there. But the role of CEO, when it was offered to me by the board, seemed very intriguing. It wasn't common or at all that a practicing physician, and I still practiced also through that time, was able to oversee a Medicare, commercial, and individual exchange business for the region. So I saw this as an opportunity like I've had many times in my life where my experience in healthcare would be beneficial to the health plan, and at the same time, I could learn something new. And I always believe that if you get an opportunity like that, where you can provide your experience knowledge base to an organization, but at the same time learn the nuances of that role, then it's a win-win because you bring a known, but you bring a new perspective to a role. So it was incredibly rewarding. We had a growth phase, but then the pandemic hit, which was interesting being CEO of a health plan and a practicing ER. So it put me in a really interesting role where, and again, I'm in a corporate environment, and in my mind, I'm an entrepreneur. So I'm treating everything I'm doing like it's my own company, which is, you realize when you think like this, even if you're in a corporate environment, it's not like the corporate environment may make you become a 9-to-5, Monday through Friday person. If you're an entrepreneur or you're the way you think, this is what you do. So I think during the pandemic, it definitely brought those true lights out because I was able to spend a lot of time with employers, sports teams, and so on to explain the pandemic. How do you get back to work? How do you get back to the basketball court? And all kinds of interesting kind of roles that intersected the clinical world and the business world during the pandemic.
You know, what I'm impressed by, Sunil, is that you have this sustained energy and drive over decades. It's really impressive what you've been able to accomplish and the amount of energy that you bring to the table. Where does that come from? How do you explain that?
Yeah, I think like and what makes this interview so fun to do with you is, energy is infectious. It's contagious. And, I have surrounded myself in and chosen work environments where people inspire me. They really like what they do. They like being where they're at, and they're interested in making change. And I always try to be in those environments as much as I can, because then it doesn't feel like work. It feels like collectively something fun together. So that's a motto I've always said, whether it's 3 or 5 years you spend in a place, but if you feel like I always say that you're not learning something and you're not teaching something and you're not making something move forward, it's probably time to consider a different role. Or a different work environment. Yeah.
I want to cover two things in the short time that we have left here. And the first is, what do you see as the major challenges in healthcare now? And what are you doing now? What are you doing post Innovation Health?
Reflecting on all my learnings in healthcare, and again, seeing where the problems lie. Because the older you get, you want to be very strategic about where you put your time, your experience, and your energy. And so that being said, I have had an opportunity to meet leaders across the payer world, the health system world, digital health, investment, and where I see clearly our problems lie in fragmentation of healthcare. Within our own ecosystem, we have silos all the way between payers, providers. Even despite all these attempts of joint ventures, the fragmentation exists across healthcare. And that's fragmentation of care coordination, it's fragmentation of data, it's fragmentation of financial models. So what we end up with is a very reactive healthcare system. Financial models that support doing more to patients after they get a disease like it's cancer or heart failure or so on. The prototypical example of this reactive healthcare system was a pandemic. Vaccines were never a profitable or an invested business that we devoted the attention until you have coronavirus.
Yes.
Then we, within months, can create an incredible technological vaccine and reactively come save the day because the costs of not were immense. So I think this fragmentation of the system has not allowed us to be coordinated, share data, and move towards a preventive, proactive system where you can actually take risk on populations and disease to promote better outcomes, if that makes sense.
Sunil, that is absolutely dead on, consistent with what I see. And we're going to have to let that be the last word. There is so much more that we have to talk about. And gosh, you've already given me, 2.5 hours today? So I really appreciate your time and your patience and your willingness to share what you've learned with the audience. It's an amazing story, and I hope there will be much more to come in the future as we talk about different, we haven't talked about AI. There are so many things. Any last words that you have for the audience before we say goodbye for today?
Yeah, I'd say no again. Robert, appreciate the opportunity to be catching up with you, and the energy is always infectious. It's great catching up here. And I would encourage folks to, the more as you try to figure out how to improve and make this healthcare system, I'm one point of view. And that point of view came from the experiences that I've had in my life that I've built in this classroom of learning, the experiential classroom of learning, right? There are many folks that have had a different experiential classroom of learning. And I think the more we think about the different components of healthcare and how they're connected, pharmacy, medical, digital health, insurance, the doctors, the patients, the more we think about them collectively and understand the basis of each of those different parts of our healthcare system, the better we'll be equipped to figure out how we bring those pieces together and really achieve an outcomes-based, value-based model. So opening our minds to the other aspects of healthcare is a key component to success.
Great perspective. You have so much more to teach, and I'm enthusiastic about the future based on folks like you. So with that, we are going to say so long for now from the Groves Connection and Dr. Sunil Budhrani. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You've been listening to The Groves Connection, your connection to the inside story on healthcare, featuring in-depth interviews with those who know. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. If you like what you hear, give us a 5-star review to keep the connection going, and hit the subscribe button to be sure you never miss a beat. The Groves Connection is produced by Dr. Robert Groves. Original music, editing, and creative direction provided by Alden Groves. Production support, content guidance, courtesy of Janae Sharp and Elizabeth Barrett. Thank you for listening. The professional ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast are mine and do not reflect those of any current or past employers. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you'll join us next time on The Groves Connection.